Hey, what's up, sports fans? This is another episode of the weekly Waiver Wire Report, and this is your host, Francis, from the Buds and Sports Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be covering the injury report and then possible waiver wire pickups for your Week 3 matchup. And diving into this injury report, first one on the list is wide receiver Deontay Johnson from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who suffered a knee injury. They fear he teared his ACL. Best case scenario, it's an MCL sprain, but his MRI is scheduled for today, and his results are pending. Next one is going to be Tua, quarterback for Miami Dolphins, who suffered a rib injury. However, it is bruised ribs, so basically going to be week to week, and based on his pain tolerance and how comfortable he is to play. Another quarterback that went down was Tyrod Taylor, quarterback for the Houston Texans. He suffered a hamstring injury, expected to be out 2 to 3 weeks. In that game, wide receiver Jarvis Landry suffered a knee injury, and he has an MRI pending. Moving on to the Rams and Colts game. Rams running back Darrell Henderson Jr. suffered a rib injury. Believed to be bruised ribs, but he does have an x-ray scheduled just to make sure. In this game, quarterback Carson Wentz suffered an ankle injury, sprained his ankle. I believe he sprained both ankles, I think. So he's going to be out for a few weeks for sure. Moving on to Bengals and Bears. Quarterback Andy Dalton suffered a knee injury. They think it's a ACL tear. His MRI is scheduled as well. Looks like Justin Fields will be taking over the starting position, though, moving forward. Then next, basically, the whole running back room for the 49ers is injured, starting with Elijah Mitchell, has a shoulder injury. Looks like it could be a stinger. If it is a stinger, he'll be back for the next game. Jermichael Hasty suffered an ankle injury. He's going to be out for a few weeks. And Trey Sermon is on concussion protocol, took a nasty hit to the head and neck, and I just hope he's all right, man, because that did not look good. Next is wide receiver Laviska Shenault, suffered a shoulder injury in week 2. He does have an MRI scheduled just to make sure there's not, any major damage done, but it's pending on how long he's going to be out. And other than that, I think that pretty much covers the injuries for week 2. So let's move on to the waiver wire. Let's start things off with the quarterback position. With Andy Dalton going down, Justin Fields is going to get the starting position. If he is available in your waiver wire, that's somebody to pick up as soon as possible. He can score with his legs, can score with his arm. He showed a lot of potential in the preseason. So Justin Fields, definitely, if he's out there, that's somebody that I would definitely consider if you need a quarterback this week. Also, Daniel Jones has a pretty nice matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. This past week, he did put up 28 fantasy points. Week 1, he put up 20. He can score with his legs, can score with his arm. He has a lot of speed, great speed. If he can just have great balance to accompany that great speed, he could actually be pretty lethal on the ground. So Daniel Jones, I feel like, is a sleeper this week as far as quarterbacks. I know not a lot of people roster him, but he does have a pretty nice matchup this week. Daniel Jones definitely is somebody to look at. One more to mention is going to be Sam Darnold, who has been looking pretty solid in that system. He hasn't posted anything too crazy this past week. He had 18 points. I believe the week before had around 19 points. But he does look pretty comfortable in that system, and he does have a matchup against the Houston Texans. So I believe Sam Darnold, being accompanied by Christian McCaffrey, and all it takes is just, dumping the ball off to McCaffrey, and there's already potential for a huge play, and that adds to Sam Darnold's stats as well. So that's somebody to look at. Moving on to the wide receivers. With the Deontay Johnson injury, I do believe James Washington is going to get a larger role in this offense. Pretty much going to move into that that slot that Deontay Johnson was in. So James Washington is somebody to look at on the waiver wire. He's going to be having a lot more playing time, a lot more snaps, with Deontay Johnson most likely out for the season or majority of the season, unfortunately. Next guy I want to mention is Quintus Cephas from the Detroit Lions. He acts like their number one receiver. He scored back-to-back weeks, has a touchdown in each game. This past week, put up 16 points. So Quintus Cephas, he does have a matchup against the Ravens this week, but he's going to get his targets for sure. The ball can't always go to Hawkinson. It can't always go to Swift. Even though if it was up to the Lions, they probably want that. But he has a pretty good usage rate. And the fact that he scored back-to-back weeks, I think they trust him. So they'll be using him. Let's see. Another guy, probably Darius Slayton against the Falcons. He's a deep ball guy. Definitely a flex play, though. Boom or bust. This guy put up about 14 points this past week. I think he put up around 9 points the first week. But they do call some deep routes for Darius Slayton. It's just he had a drop pass this past week. But one of these games, it's going to connect with Daniel Jones and Darius Slayton. They're going to connect on the long play, long bomb. So that's somebody to look at. And other than that, I think those are probably the most three notable mentions on the waiver wire for the wide receiver position. Let's move on to running backs. Since Darrell Henderson Jr. is dealing with a rib injury, if he's expected to be out for a couple weeks or a game or two, Sony Michel is going to take the starting role. That running back room has suffered. Cam Akers went down. Now Darrell Henderson's down. So Sony Michel is going to get that starting position. Somebody else to look at on the waiver wire is Zach Moss, running back for the Buffalo Bills. When you think of the Bills, you do tend to think of, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, and that aerial attack. But, they've shown that they could win games running the ball as well. Like they played against the Dolphins. And Zach Moss was able to grind out 14 fantasy points. So I know in most 12-man PPR leagues, especially with all the injuries that have been happening at the running back position, the running back position is running really thin. And it's getting to be a pretty big struggle out here. So Sony Michel, Zach Moss, two guys that you want to look at. And then the main guy I kind of want to bring up in this week's waiver wire report is Cordarrelle Patterson. He's considered a running back, but he does get a nice split between rushing attempts and running routes to catch balls. So he does have the ability to score rushing touchdowns and to catch them too. And in fantasy football, that's very valuable. He posted up a monster 23 points this past week. And he does have a matchup against the Giants this week. So Cordarrelle Patterson is a pretty nice flex play, I believe, moving forward. If you're running thin, especially if you're running thin at the running back position, because it is really thin out there. There's been a lot of injuries through the first 2 weeks of football. So Cordarrelle Patterson, very promising flex play. And that's pretty much going to cover the running backs. It's a struggle out there, so good luck to everybody. All right, we're going to move on to the tight end position. Not going to spend too much time here. I'm just going to mention Dawson Knox has posted a total of 17 fantasy points for through the first 2 weeks, had 9 points this past week. Bills have plenty of other weapons, but Dawson Knox does become a red zone target. He is a pretty big dude. So that's a possible play if you're in desperate need of a tight end. Another guy is Jack Doyle from the Colts. He's posted a total of 18 fantasy points through the first 2 weeks. This past week, put up 13 points. He's just a guy that if you need to fill in that slot and you need at least 5 to 10 points, Jack Doyle can probably get that for you. He does have a matchup against the Titans this week. It's a division game. Not really. There's no really telling if that's gonna be a shootout or, division games can be funky. So, but he is a possible pickup. Eric Ebron hasn't really posted great numbers this year, but I think with Deontay Johnson going down, and he is kind of a veteran guy there. So I do think even though he hasn't posted good numbers through the first 2 weeks, Eric Ebron can eventually find his way into this offense. And then another guy just to mention is Dalton Schultz from the Cowboys. He did only post 3 points this past week in that ugly game versus the Chargers. Does have a total of 13 fantasy points, posted 10 points in the first week. But, the Cowboys do call plays for the tight ends. And this year, with Blake Jarwin kind of easing his way back in from his injury, Dalton Schultz does have potential. He does have potential to be a play. And they do play the Eagles, so that's another division game. Moving on from the tight ends, we'll just take a look at the defenses here. I like the Cardinals defense against the Jaguars. The Bengals defense is actually not too bad. They do play the Steelers. That's a division game. And the Panthers defense, they've actually been really solid the first 2 weeks of football. Posted a total of 25 fantasy points through the first 2 weeks. First game put up 11 points. This past week put up 14 points. They do have a matchup against the Houston Texans, who are going to be playing their backup quarterback. So, this is a recipe for another solid game for the Panthers defense. If they are available in your waiver wire, that's a very good pickup this week. That's probably my favorite pickup and matchup for the week. Let's take a look here. I don't really see any other matchup that necessarily pops out to me. Maybe the Bears against the Browns. The Bears did put up 21 points this past week, but the Browns do have a lot of firepower, and the Bears are going to be away. So I think on this slate for this week, I would have to go with the Cardinals defense against the Jaguars and the Panthers defense against the Texans. Those would be my 2 favorite picks right there. And you know what? I'm not even going to bother with kickers. That's just a position where if you got one, you got one. If you don't, I'm sorry. It's a struggle out there in the NFL. But hey, there's really no telling who's making what. But real quick, Matt Prater, I'm going to shout him out just because he nailed a 62-yarder this past week. So Matt Prater from the Cardinals, you get a shout out, and you're probably the only shout out. So that's going to pretty much do it for the weekly waiver wire report. This has been your host, Francis, from the Buds and Sports Podcast. Please tune in next week for your weekly waiver wire report, and we'll see you next time. Peace.